Dragons. Big. Scaly. Fire-breathing. Egomaniacs with wings. Or maybe wise. Snake-like celestial protectors with flowing whiskers and suspiciously good vibes. Depends where you ask. Europe. Bad dragon. China. Good dragon. America. Probably copyrighted by Disney and voiced by Benedict Cumberbatch. Let's start at the beginning. Like prehistoric beginning. Before empires. Before organized religion. Before even cheese. Humans were looking at the bones of long-dead megaporna and thinking, yeah, that looks like a nightmare. Let's tell everyone about it. Mesopotamia. Around 4000 B.C. Humans were trying to explain why the sky was sometimes angry, why people randomly died, and why rivers occasionally went berserk and drowned entire villages. Their answer: monsters. Giant serpentine chaos beasts. Enter Tiamat, the OG sea dragon goddess of saltwater. Chaos. And not taking your nonsense. She gives birth to an army of monsters. Starts a divine war. And ends up getting sliced in half by a storm god named Marduk. He uses her carcass to create the sky and the earth. Very DIY. Very Etsy gone wrong. But hey, now we have a world and a precedent. Dragons are dangerous, divine, and must be conquered by men with complexes. India wasn't far behind. In the Rig Veda, we meet Vitra, a massive serpent or dragon who hoards water and causes droughts. The god Indra kills him to release the rivers and save the day. Another dragon. Another storm god. Another overcompensation. You sensing a pattern yet? Ancient China took a different approach. Dragons, they were never the enemy. In fact, they were a pretty big deal. Emblems of imperial power. Symbols of natural forces. And divine beings capable of controlling the elements. Chinese dragons don't hoard gold. They hoard clouds. They don't torch villages. They bring the rain. These dragons are long and serpentine with deer antlers, lion claws, and the attitude of a weather deity who knows they're too important to get cancelled. They represent harmony, wisdom, and cosmic order. And if you're born in the year of the dragon, congratulations. You're basically royalty. They were so revered that emperors claimed to be descended from dragons. Even their thrones were called dragon thrones. There were imperial dragon robes, dragon symbols on buildings, dragon dances. If you were powerful, wealthy, or wanted to look impressive while bossing people around, dragons were your go-to aesthetic. Meanwhile, in the West, dragons were less rainbringer and more apocalypse starter. The Greeks gave us monsters like Leon, the multi-headed serpent guarding the golden apples in the Garden of the Hesperides, and Typhon, the father of monsters who could breathe fire and scream like 1,000 dying goats. And who could forget the Hydra? Cut off one head. Get two more. It's the mythological version of spam emails. But Europe really leaned into the dragon thing during the Middle Ages. This was peak dragon fever. Every country had its dragon. England had the legend of St. George, the Christian knight, who allegedly slayed a dragon that was either terrorizing a town or just minding its own business near a water source. Scandinavia had Fafnir, a dwarf-turned-dragon who hoarded cursed gold and got stabbed by a vengeful hero with serious daddy issues. Germany had the Nibelungen Lied, which gave us another greedy dragon and another hero stabbing it in the heart because subtlety was illegal back then. So why were Europeans so obsessed with dragons being evil? Because they represented sin and heresy and probably bad haircuts. Medieval dragons were metaphors. Baby, they were Satan, the devil, temptation itself. Every time a knight slayed a dragon, he was symbolically defeating the devil. The church loved this. Knights loved this. Dragons, not so much. Let's talk anatomy. Because dragons are nothing if not biology's most chaotic experiment. In Eastern cultures, dragons are long, slender, elegant, no wings. They fly through sheer majesty. Their scales are iridescent. Their whiskers flow in the breeze. And they have this constant expression like they know what you did last summer. In Western culture, dragons are the bulky gym rats of mythology. For legs, 2 wings, a spiked tail, and a head full of dental problems. They breathe fire because why not? And they roar a lot. Honestly, they're what you'd get if a bat, a lion, a crocodile, and a bad attitude had a baby. But dragons are flexible. Some are sea-dwelling. Some live in the mountains. Some live underground. Some guard ancient temples. Some nest in volcanoes like they're auditioning for a travel documentary narrated by Satan. And that brings us to the question. Why the hoarding? What is with dragons and treasure? They don't shop. They don't gamble. They don't even decorate. And yet every medieval story ends with a dragon sleeping on a mountain of gold like a scaly Scrooge McDuck. Theories. Some say it symbolizes greed. Others think it represents corrupted power. Treasure gained through destruction. Or maybe the real answer is humans project everything onto dragons, including our unhinged capitalist tendencies. Let's break down some of their skills. Fire breathing. Check. Perfect for barbecues and medieval warfare. Flying. Check. Except Eastern dragons don't need wings because they're too mystical for gravity. Talking sometimes depends on whether the writer needed a wise sage or just a boss-level monster. Shape-shifting occasionally, especially in Japanese and Korean folklore where dragons can transform into humans. Usually gorgeous, mysterious ones who cause problems. Immortality often cause what's scarier than a giant death lizard. A forever giant death lizard. So, could they have been real? Short answer. No. Long answer. Still no. But let's unpack that. What people did find were fossils. Dinosaur bones. Mammoth skeletons. The occasional beached whale rotting in a confusing shape. And they didn't have paleontology textbooks. So when they saw massive bones, they assumed monsters. Fair. Add in exaggeration, fear, and too much meat, and you've got a solid recipe for dragon myths. Also, large reptiles do exist. Crocodiles, Komodo dragons, massive snakes. Imagine seeing one of those for the first time without context while holding a torch in a dark cave. That's trauma. That's legend fuel. Why did people believe in them for so long? Because dragons filled the gaps. Gaps in knowledge. Gaps in fear. Gaps in control. Why did the village burn? Dragons. Why did the king lose his war? Dragons. Why does my neighbor's cow keep going missing? Dragons. Karen. Obviously. They were the perfect narrative device. Need a villain. Dragon. Need a challenge for your hero. Dragon. Need a cautionary tale to scare your kids into behaving. Tell them a dragon eats naughty children and see how fast they do their chores. And in pop culture, dragons have never been more alive. From Smallow to Drogon to Toothless, we've got dragons in every flavor. Smart, funny, scary, sad. They've got personality, depth, branding deals. In The Hobbit, Smallow is a sarcastic, egotistical gold hoarder with an incredible vocabulary and zero patience for dwarves. In Game of Thrones, dragons are weapons of mass destruction that are adorable as hatchlings and horrifying as adults. In How to Train Your Dragon, we get a whole dragon taxonomy complete with night furies, growls, and deadly natters because apparently the Norse invented Pokemon. And let's not forget Harry Potter, which treats dragons like dangerous exotic pets. Best used in school sports and high-security vaults. Cool. Today, dragons mean many things. In business, They symbolize power and prestige. In gaming, they're bosses and allies. In literature, they're metaphors for addiction, trauma, or capitalism. Take your pick. They're found on flags, coats of arms, logos, fantasy novels, plush toys, tattoos, and probably a dozen NFT collections that someone regrets buying. They're versatile, timeless, and ironically very human, because at their core, dragons are us, our fears, our desires, our rage, our longing to control the uncontrollable. We created dragons not just to scare ourselves, but to challenge ourselves, to give us something to defeat or befriend or become. So, as you drift off tonight, picture a dragon, not as a monster, not as a hero, just as a reflection of myth, of history, of us. And remember, dragons may not be real, but they're true. And sometimes that's more important. Unicorns. Now, we're taking a glitter-drenched detour from fire-breathing reptiles to something that's become the mascot for cupcake stores. Glitter makeup and weird corporate motivational posters. The unicorn. Yes, unicorns. The horned horse of your Lacer Frank notebook. The sparkly savior of viral TikToks. But before they became the plushy overlords of childhood bedrooms, they were something else entirely. Wild, mysterious, dangerous, even a symbol of the uncatchable, the incorruptible, the deeply misunderstood. Let's gallop way, way back. Like no written language yet back. Ancient Mesopotamia and the Indus Valley left us some suspiciously unicorn-like figures on seals. Beasts with a single horn poking from their foreheads. Now skeptics aka party poopers argue this was just lazy perspective. Drawing a bull in profile makes two horns look like one. But believers, they were all in. One horn equals magical creature equals let's build a legend. In ancient Assyrian and Babylonian art, single-horned animals occasionally pop up, though it's often unclear whether we're looking at artistic flair or an actual belief in unicorn-like creatures. But by the time the Greeks showed up, they were ready to sell it. Enter Ctesias, a Greek physician who hung out at the Persian court around 400 BCE, and apparently never met a tall tale he didn't love. He described a wild beast from India the size of a horse, white with a crimson head, blue eyes, and a spiraled horn over a foot long. Sounds like someone got high on spice trade fumes and started mixing up rhinos and hallucinogenic dreams. But it stuck for centuries. Ctesias's unicorn could not only detect poison, but purify water. Its horn, later known as alicorn, became a miracle cure-all. European nobility would kill for a vial of ground-up unicorn horn. Literally. They paid insane amounts of money for what was in most cases narwhal tusk. But what's a little marine fraud between monarchs? Even Pliny the Elder, the Roman world's most ambitious fact bluffer, jumped in. He described a ferocious beast with the body of a horse, the head of a stag, the feet of an elephant, the tail of a boar, and a single black horn. So, a unicorn as designed by a toddler with access to a glue stick and a box of National Geographic clippings. Meanwhile, the Bible made things weirder. The Hebrew word rim, probably referring to the aurochs, a now extinct giant ox, got translated as unicorn in the Greek Septuagint and the Latin Vulgate. Enter King James and the English Bible and boom. Unicorns became scriptural. People began insisting they had to be real because, well, God said so. That's not a debate you want to have at dinner. Fast forward to medieval Europe and unicorns are everywhere. They appear in bestiaries, sort of the medieval version of BuzzFeed lists, but with worse illustrations, and are described as incredibly strong, noble, elusive creatures. And there's one catch. They can only be caught by a virgin. Yes, we're back to that plot device again. The The story went like this. Hunters trying to catch a unicorn would send a young, pure maiden into the forest. The unicorn, sensing her virtue, would approach, gently, lay its head in her lap, and promptly get ambushed by dudes with spears. Romance. This story caught on like wildfire. Suddenly, unicorns became a heavy-handed symbol of Christ with the Virgin representing Mary, the hunters as the crucifiers, and the unicorn as the willing sacrifice. Because nothing says divine love like baiting a magical horse into a cuddle ambush. In religious art, unicorns show up everywhere. Tapestries, stained glass, manuscripts. The famous unicorn tapestries from the late 15th century show a group of men hunting a unicorn, capturing it, killing it, and eventually resurrecting it in an enclosed garden. It's either a religious allegory, a metaphor for romantic longing, or a very confused medieval soap opera. Either way, stunning work. But don't be fooled. Not all unicorns were white and sweet. Some were downright terrifying. There's the Kamihito from Chilean mythology, a monstrous aquatic unicorn-cow hybrid that drags people into rivers and leaves destruction in its wake. It's said to grow from a piece of horn and cause storms and landslides. So basically, if Godzilla and a rhino had a baby and gave it magical puberty powers. In Japanese folklore, we meet the Kirin or Kin in Chinese mythology, a chimeric beast often associated with unicorns. But this isn't your dainty forest dweller. It has the body of a deer, the tail of an ox, cloven hooves, and flames around its body. Sometimes it has scales, sometimes a dragon face, and while peaceful and benevolent, it'll torch your village if you're corrupt. It shows up when a just ruler is born or dies. Either way, a very dramatic party guest. Let's talk anatomy. In the Western tradition, unicorns are white horses, though early depictions were more goat-like with cloven hooves, beards, and a lion's tail. The horn is always long, spiraled, and centered like a cosmic antenna. It glows, purifies. It sparkles with the smug confidence of someone who's never been caught doing anything wrong. In Eastern traditions, unicorn-like beings are hybrids, much less horsey and more symbolic. They're not just magic. They're omens. They appear rarely and only for people who deserve them. Powers and skills. Purification. The alicorn was believed to neutralize any toxin. That goblet of poisoned wine. Stir it with a unicorn horn. Boom. Safe to drink. Still gross though. Healing. Touch a unicorn horn to your wound and be healed. No copay required. Speed. They could outrun anything, including your bad decisions. Virtue. Sensing. If you were pure-hearted, they'd approach you. If not, well, good luck catching one. Immortality. Clairvoyance. Invincibility. Depends on the legend. Basically, if you needed a plot device, unicorns had you covered. Could they be real? Science says no, but storytelling says maybe. We've got fossils like the Elasmtherum, a massive Ice Age beast that had one big horn and looked a bit like a hairy rhino. Some believe it inspired early unicorn legends. Then there's the narwhal, a whale with a literal unicorn tusk sticking out of its face. Vikings sold narwhal horns to gullible Europeans as proof of unicorns. No refunds. Rhinos too played their part, especially the Indian rhinoceros, which had one horn, a bad temper, and a face only a mother or a confused explorer could love. Marco Polo mistook one for a unicorn, calling it ugly, brutish, and not nearly as cute as the ones back home in the fairy tales. But again, unicorns weren't about biological possibility. They were about belief, about longing, about putting purity on a pedestal and then spearing it with a moral lesson. People wanted unicorns to exist because a world with unicorns is a world with hope. So what happened? Like many mythical creatures, unicorns got a PR makeover. The Enlightenment came and the age of science started side-eyeing miracle horns. By the 18th century, belief in unicorns shifted from serious to symbolic. But the imagery stuck around, and coats of arms. Scotland's national animal is literally a unicorn. In literature, the last unicorn, Harry Potter, Narnia, and eventually in pop culture. Now, unicorns are everywhere. They're pink. They're glittery. They're farting rainbows in children's cartoons. They're motivational metaphors in TED Talks. They've been queered, memed, commercialized, and resurrected more times than your average Marvel character. Today, a unicorn can be a rare startup valued at over $1 billion. The quirky personality type on a dating app. Or that person at brunch who orders the most aggressively pastel drink on the menu. But they're still magic. Still elusive. Still symbolic. Still ours. So as you close your eyes tonight, don't picture the tame, sparkly pony version. Picture the wild unicorn. The one running alone under the moonlight. Horn gleaming. Untouchable. Not because it doesn't exist, but because it refuses to be caught. Mermaids. Now, we're diving deep, literally, into one of mythology's most alluring, slippery enigmas. The mermaid. That's right. Half human, half fish. All drama. You've seen them in Disney movies, pop albums, bath bomb packaging, and probably in at least one questionable tattoo. But long before they became singing princesses with fabulous hair and commitment issues, mermaids were a lot weirder, darker, and occasionally straight-up terrifying. So, light a candle, tune your inner sonar, and prepare to submerge. Let's start where most good nightmares do. Mesopotamia, around 1000 BC. The first known mermaid-like deity is Atargatis, the Syrian goddess of fertility, love, and water. One day, she falls in love with a mortal shepherd. Bad idea. Accidentally kills him. Worse idea. And stricken with grief, jumps into a lake to become a fish. Except, plot twist, the water refuses to fully transform her because she's too divine. So she ends up half woman, half fish. And just like that, mermaid law gets its dramatic origin story. The Greeks later equated her with Aphrodite. Syrians built temples for her. Fishermen made offerings to her before casting their nets. And from that divine heartbreak, the template was set. Mermaids were here to enchant, destroy, and leave a trail of wet chaos. The Greeks, of course, were not about to be left out. Enter the sirens. Originally not fishy at all. In early Greek myths, sirens were bird women who lived on rocky islands and lured sailors to their deaths with hypnotic songs. Wings, feathers, talons, the whole Hitchcock horror package. But over time, perhaps because sailors spent more time looking at waves than watching birds, the siren evolved into a sea creature. By the Middle Ages, sirens and mermaids were functionally the same thing. Half woman, half fish, fully dangerous. The transition from bird to fish was messy but inevitable. The sea has always held a special place in the human imagination. Vast, deep, unknowable, and humans love to project. The ocean was female. The ocean was wild. And so the seductive killer became a glamorous sea temptress. Medieval Europe was obsessed. Mermaids swam into church sermons, besties, tapestries, and illuminated manuscripts. They were cautionary tales dressed in seashell bras. The church saw them as allegories of sin, especially lust, tempting on the surface, but fatal underneath. much like the theology itself. In art, mermaids were often shown holding mirrors and combs, symbols of vanity. That's right. She's about to drown you and check her reflection while doing it. Iconic. Let's talk anatomy. The classic Western mermaid has the following human upper body. Almost always beautiful, usually nude, always suspiciously well-groomed for someone living in brine. Fishtail. Sleek, shiny, sometimes split into two for dramatic effect. Ariel got legs. Others get a finnward torpedo base. Long hair, always wet, never frizzy. Hair care secrets lost to time. Voice so lovely it kills you. So basically Adele with gills. But other cultures had very different takes. Let's swim around the globe. In Slavic mythology, the Rusalki are water spirits, often the ghosts of drowned women, especially those who died violently or tragically during summer nights. They'd leave the water to dance in fields, sing haunting songs, and yes, lure men to watery graves. Some legends say they just want company. Others say they want revenge. Either way, don't swipe right. In Japan, there's the ningo, which translates to human fish. But it's not cute. It's got a monkey's mouth, fishy body, and shimmering gold scales. Eating its flesh grants immortality, but catching one brings misfortune. Legend tells of a woman who accidentally ate ningo meat and lived for 800 years. Her friends less lucky. In Africa, particularly in Western Central African spiritual traditions, we meet Mami Wata. She is glamorous, powerful, seductive, and sometimes dangerous. She appears in dreams, seduces people with beauty and wealth, and demands loyalty. If you please her, she brings prosperity. If you cross her, you drown. Balance. Caribbean folklore brings us Lazarine, a Haitian lower of the sea. She's mysterious, regal, beautiful, and like many sea spirits, plays by her own rules. She may offer riches, visions, songs, or she may pull you into the depths, never to return. In Scandinavia, we meet the Havru, sea women, and Havand, seamen. The Havru could be kind, granting gifts, saving drowning sailors, or cruel, dragging them to their deaths. You never knew which. It was a coin toss with scales. Then there's the Selkie from Irish and Scottish law. Not technically mermaids, but close cousins. Selkies are seals in the water, humans on land. They shed their seal skins to become human. If someone steals their skin, they're trapped. These tales are almost always sad. A man falls in love with a Selkie, hides her seal skin so she can't return to the sea. They marry, have children, and then one day she finds it and she leaves because she was never his to keep. Let's talk powers. Voice magic. From siren songs to Rusalka lays. The voice is a weapon. Weather control. Some mermaids summon storms. Others calm the seas. Shape-shifting. Selkies. Mamiata. Lacerine. All known to change form. Foresight and prophecy. In some myths, mermaids can see the future, and it's not looking good for you. Healing or harm. A touch that cures or kills. Mood dependent. So, could they be real? Let's be brutally honest. Nope. But let's also be human for a second. Ancient sailors were not living their best lives. Poor nutrition. Terrible hygiene. Zero entertainment. They'd be months at sea. Hallucinating. Sunburned. Half mad from dehydration and boredom. Enter the manatee. Manatees are gentle. Blubbery sea cows. But if you're squinting from a rocking ship at twilight and haven't seen a woman in 6 months, your brain might fill in some blanks. Add a dash of loneliness and a splash of rum. Hello, mermaid. Some scholars suggest the legend of mermaids helped explain tragic disappearances. The sailor swept overboard. A ship lost at sea. Must be a mermaid. It gave chaos a face. And sometimes that's all people want to imagine. A reason. A face. Even a beautiful one. But mermaids aren't just about lost. They're also about longing. They embody the desire for transformation, for escape. They live between worlds, human and animal, land and sea, love and death. In literature and pop culture, mermaids evolved again. Hans Christian Andersen's The Little Mermaid gave us the original sad girl of the sea, willing to give up her voice, her tail, and her soul for love. And what does she get? Pain, rejection, and bubbles. Not exactly a happy ending. Disney changed the game. Ariel got a makeover, a catchy soundtrack, and a wedding. Suddenly, mermaids were fun, plucky, and family-friendly. But even then, the allure remained. The longing, the transformation, the tension between freedom and belonging. Since then, mermaids have swam through fantasy novels, horror films, feminist retellings, erotica, don't ask, art, advertising, and TikTok filters. They've been reimagined as climate warriors, trans icons, ancestral spirits, and indie softcore metaphors. Their tale may shimmer, but the symbolism runs deep. In today's world, mermaids are everywhere on backpacks, beauty products, protest signs, and pride floats. They represent beauty, power, danger, magic, femininity unchained. They're a reminder that what is beautiful can also be dangerous, that the unknown isn't always ugly, and that not everything that wants you loves you. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine the ocean, not calm, not safe, but vast, alive, full of voices, and among them, one voice louder, clearer, a song not meant for your ears, a face that's too perfect, a tail disappearing beneath the waves. Sleep tight. Don't lean over the edge because sometimes the sea sings back. Phoenix now. We're talking about the creature that dies gloriously just to be reborn. Even more fabulous. The phoenix. Yes, the phoenix. The legendary firebird. The mythological symbol of rebirth, resilience, and dramatic exits. The only creature in history that would look you in the eye, burst into flames, and call it self-care. You've seen the memes. You've seen the tattoos. Maybe you've used it in a breakup text. But this bird has been flapping through history for millennia, changing shapes, names, and metaphors depending on who's telling the story. So, grab your metaphorical fire extinguisher or don't. It won't work. And let's rise from the ashes together. Let's start in ancient Egypt, where we meet the Bennu, a heron-like bird, associated with the sun, creation, and of course, rebirth. This shimmering aven hangs out near the sacred Persea tree in Heliopolis and is connected to Ra, the sun god. Some say it emerged from the primordial waters of chaos at the beginning of time because why start a story small when you can start with cosmic bird magic? The Bennu wasn't flaming per se, but it was radiant, solar-powered, and had vibes strong enough to inspire legends across continents. It was said to renew itself, perhaps not in fire, but through sheer divine glow-up energy. Egyptian priests considered the Bennu sacred. It may have represented the soul of Ra himself or even the soul of Osiris. It wasn't just a bird. It was a walking or rather flying symbol of life, death, and the cyclical nature of time. The Nile flooded. The sun rose. The phoenix renewed. Easy. Enter the Greeks who saw the Egyptian Bennu and said, "We can work with this, but let's add fire and drama." In Greek mythology, the phoenix was described as a radiant bird, possibly resembling an eagle or peacock with red and gold feathers that sparkled like the sun. According to Herodotus, only one phoenix existed at a time. It lived for 500 years. Or 461. Accuracy was optional. And when it felt death approaching, it built itself a nest of aromatic woods and spices. Myrrh, cinnamon, frankincense. Then it set itself on fire, burned gloriously, and from its ashes, a new phoenix would rise. No fuss, no panic, just rebirth. The Greeks being themselves took this concept and ran with it. The phoenix became a symbol of immortality, of victory over death, and eventually of empire. The Romans loved it. Early Christians really loved it. Resurrection symbolism. Yes, please. They slapped that flaming bird on tombs, sermons, and stained glass like it was a holy sticker pack. Later, Roman writers like Lactantius added more layers. Now, the phoenix flew to Heliopolis to burn on an altar of the sun god. This gave it both spiritual clout and frequent flyer status. Early Christianity picked it up and gave it a divine rebrand. Suddenly, the phoenix wasn't just a cool myth. It was a metaphor for Christ's death and resurrection, a fiery emblem of eternal life. You could find it carved on tombstones, painted in catacombs, and used as shorthand for the promise of salvation. Take that. Bird watchers. Chinese mythology had its own phoenix known as the Feng Huang. But let's be clear. This is not the same as the Western phoenix. The Feng Huang is a composite creature. Part peacock, part pheasant, part mythological megabird. It represents yin and yang, harmony, grace, and the empress's virtue. It doesn't die and rebirth itself in flames. It's eternal, serene, and more of a celestial symbol than a fire hazard. The Feng Huang pairs with the dragon, symbolizing a balanced cosmic duality, where the dragon is yang, masculine, powerful, dynamic. The Feng Huang is yin, graceful, calm, majestic. Together, they were symbols of the imperial couple. Think divine power couple, Beyoncé and Jay-Z, but with wings. Persian mythology gives us the simar, an immense peacock-like bird with wisdom to spare. It lives on the tree of life and can purify the land with a flap of its wings. The simar raises heroes, grants knowledge, and serves as a divine maternal figure. While it doesn't combust, it shares the phoenix's themes of renewal and transcendence. Indian epics offer the Garuda, the vehicle of Vishnu, and another giant godland bird. Garuda is fiery, radiant, and eagle-shaped, often associated with the sun and divine protection. Again, no self-immolation, but plenty of grandeur. All around the world, we see the same thing, a sacred bird connected to fire, the sun, life cycles or resurrection. Even among Native American tribes, birds like the thunderbird fill a similar cultural role. Massive, powerful, otherworldly, and cosmic in purpose. So, what does a phoenix look like? Size: huge, probably larger than any known bird. Big enough to be majestic. Small enough to not eclipse the sun. Color: gold, red, orange, flame colors, but depending on the story, sometimes sapphire, blue, silver, or even rainbow, feathers glowing, magical. In some versions, a single phoenix feather could cure disease or light an eternal flame. Nest built of spice and incense. More luxurious than most human apartments. It's basically a spa for death. Voice: melodious, divine haunting, the kind of song that makes you cry for reasons you don't understand. Abilities: rebirth. Obviously, the entire brand. Immortality adjacent. Not living forever. Just being really good at dying and coming back. Healing tears added in later fantasy. But now a staple. Thanks again. Folks, fireproof everything. Immune to fire. Born in it. Probably annoyed by your scented candles. Inspiration delivery system. A metaphor in motion. If hope had feathers. This is it. Could it be real? Of course not. But let's be honest. That's beside the point. No one needs a phoenix to be real. What they need is what it means. It's a narrative salve for a species haunted by impermanence. Life ends. Dreams fail. Empires crumble. But the phoenix says you can begin again. People believed in the phoenix because they had to. Because the world burned literally and metaphorically, and they needed something to rise from that devastation. The phoenix doesn't ignore suffering. It includes it. The fire is part of the journey. In medieval alchemy, the phoenix became an allegory for transformation. The death of base metal. The fire of the furnace. The rebirth of gold. The phoenix is the soul purified and reborn through trial. The ultimate spiritual exfoliation. In revolutionary politics, the sword again. Rome fell, but from its ashes, new empires rose. France burned and liberty re-emerged. Even in modern movements, the phoenix is used as a rallying cry. Burn the old system and rise anew. And in pop culture, still flaming, Harry Potter forks the phoenix. Loyal. Healing. Dramatically flaming in and out of scenes like a mystical Florence Welch. He cries healing tears, bursts into flames, and carries heavy loads. Literally and metaphorically. X-Men, Gone Grey becomes the Phoenix Force. A cosmic entity of rebirth, destruction, and more emotional complexity than most doctoral theses. She dies. She returns. She explodes. Planets. Relatable fiction and fantasy. You'll find phoenixes in everything from Final Fantasy to Dungeons and Dragons. Pokemon to Magic the Gathering. The shorthand for comeback. Revival. The glow up of myth. The phoenix is on coats of arms. National flags. Motivational posters. And personal journals. Is tattooed across scars. Rising up backs. Burning over hearts. It marks transitions. Commemorates losses. And signals rebirths. Personal. Political. Emotional. Spiritual. It means I've been through fire. And look, I'm still here. So tonight, as you lie in the ashes of your daily grind, imagine that somewhere within you, something is stirring. A spark. A glow. A feather catching light. Sleep tight. Burn bright. You'll rise again. Centaurs. Now we're trotting into dangerous territory. Hooves first. That's right. We're talking about the half-men. Half-horse chaos machines known as centaurs. The ultimate mythological mashup. The original hybrid horror. Majestic from the waist up. Absolute nightmare from the waist down. The centaur is what happens when the ancient Greeks looked at a man and a horse and thought, yes, combine them for science. But before they became frat bros of the ancient world, drunk, violent, and allergic to shirts, centaurs had a deeper story, a legacy rooted in fear, wildness, and the eternal struggle between civilization and instinct. Let's clatter our hooves back to ancient Thessal Greece. That's where centaurs first thunder into myth born from a very bad idea and a truly bizarre love triangle. It all starts with Ixion, a mortal king with the subtlety of a collapsing amphitheater. After murdering his father-in-law, he somehow convinces Zeus to forgive him and let him hang out on Olympus. Big mistake, because as soon as he gets there, he tries to seduce Hera, Zeus, who never misses a chance for petty divine theatrics, crafts a cloud version of Hera and leaves it in Ixion's path. Predictably, Ixion takes the bait and beds the cloud. Out of this bizarre liaison is born Centauros, a hybrid being who then mates with a herd of wild mares. The offspring, a new race of beings, centaurs. So yes, centaurs are the descendants of a man, a cloud, and a whole lot of very confused horses. Welcome to Greek mythology. From their chaotic conception, centaurs were branded as wild and ungovernable. They lived in the mountainous and wooded regions of Thessaly, territories far from the cities and temples of refined Greek life. To the Greeks who love to think of themselves as the pinnacle of reason and culture, centaurs represented everything that lay beyond the thin veil of civilization. They were the embodiment of primal instinct, passionate, reckless, dangerously free. This fear of the untamed was immortalized in one of the most infamous episodes in Greek myth. The centaur. No, not a trendy new CrossFit workout. The Centurome was the mythical battle between the centaurs and the Lapiths. The story begins with the wedding of Pirithous, king of the Lapiths, who generously invites the centaurs to join the celebration. It's a touching moment of unity until someone breaks out the wine. Now, centaurs are famously terrible at moderation, especially when it comes to alcohol. One drink in and the centaurs are rioting. They try to abduct the bride, her bridesmaids, and presumably anyone standing too close to the dessert table. Chaos erupts. The Lapiths fight back. Furniture is used as weapons. Limbs are lost. VS are painted. And in the end, the centaurs are driven out. This wasn't just a mythological brawl. It was a philosophical cautionary tale. The Lapiths stood for order, reason, and societal control. The centaurs stood for lawlessness, appetite, and everything that civilization fears about the wild. This story became a favorite theme in Greek art depicted on temples, sculptures, and pottery, usually with the centaurs getting a brutal, metaphor-heavy beating. But even in this mythos of madness, one centaur stood apart. His name was Chiron, and unlike his rowdy cousins, he was dignified, learned, and painfully well-behaved. That's because Chiron didn't descend from the cloud incident. He was the son of the Titan Chrones and the sea nymph Phaera. And thanks to that divine parentage, he was blessed or perhaps cursed with wisdom, kindness, and a total lack of interest in starting bar fights. Chiron became the ancient world's most sought-after teacher. He tutored a who's who of Greek heroes: Achilles, Jason, Heracles, Asclepius. He taught them medicine, music, ethics, archery, and how to not act like a complete donkey in a toga. He lived on Mount Pelion in a cave filled with scrolls, herbs, and just enough mystical gravitas to make Socrates jealous. Tragically, Chiron's story ends with a painful irony. He's accidentally shot with a poisoned arrow. Yes, by Heracles, one of his former students. Because of his immortality, Kern can't die, but the wound is unbearable. In an act of true nobility, he volunteers to give up his immortality to free Prometheus, the fire-stealing titan who's been chained to a rock for eternity. Chiron dies so another may live, and the gods honor him by placing him among the stars as the constellation Sagittarius, which frankly is a glow-up. While Chiron got the celestial retirement plan, his species got TYP cast. Over the centuries, centaurs became symbols of every human struggle between mind and body, thought and desire, control and chaos. They represented the beast within us all, the part that wants to run wild, drink deep, fight hard, and never apologize. In medieval bestiaries, centaurs weren't treated with much sympathy. They were lumped in with other morally dubious hybrids like satyrs, harpies, and your average tax collector. They stood for lust, gluttony, pride. They were men undone by their animal half. incapable of resisting their urges. But by the Renaissance, things got more nuanced. Artists and writers began exploring the tension between the centaur's human mind and animal form. They weren't just beasts. They were metaphors. They appeared in paintings, plays, and philosophical texts. Noble savages, tragic figures, or cautionary emblems of imbalance. In the 19th and 20th centuries, centaurs were rediscovered by poets, romantics, and fantasists. Writers like C.S. Lewis gave them a place in mythic kingdoms like Narnia, where they were wise, noble warriors attuned to the stars and loyal to justice. Others made them more comical or sensual or even sensitive. The centaur became a flexible figure, part guardian, part wild card, part misunderstood legend. And then came modern fantasy and pop culture, where centaurs really started to gallop. In Harry Potter, they stalk the forbidden forest like brooding professors of astrology. They're noble, cryptic, and only tolerate humans when absolutely necessary. In Percy Jackson, the beloved Chiron reappears as a wheelchair-using Latin teacher who reveals he's been a horse from the waist down this whole time. In Narnia, centaurs are armor-clad warriors with prophetic gifts. And across countless fantasy worlds, from Dungeons and Dragons to anime to video games, centaurs show up as both heroes and villains, sages and savages, scholars and hunters. In the age of the internet, centaurs have also become icons of meme culture, fan art, and questionable lifestyle branding. From sexy centaur calendars to bizarre TikTok skits involving horses with Wi-Fi, the mythology has definitely evolved. But beneath all the absurdity, the centaur still speaks to something real. That tug-of-war inside us between instinct and intellect. That desire to be free but also good. To run wild but also to belong. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, imagine the quiet of a moonlit forest, the distant thud of hooves, a shadow with human eyes and a horse's grace, a being straddling two worlds. Not quite man, not quite beast, but all legend. Sleep well, and if you dream of hoof beatots, remember they might not be galloping away. They might be circling back. Kraken. Now, we're not just dipping a toe. We're going full fathoms deep because we're talking about the ultimate sea monster. The tentacled terror of sailors' nightmares. The destroyer of ships and sanity. The Kraken. Yes. The Kraken. That name alone practically echoes with creaking wood, crashing waves, and someone screaming abandoned ship in Old Norse. It's been blamed for vanishing vessels, shredded hulls, inexplicable whirlpools, and probably at least one sailor's regrettable tattoo. It's the maritime boogeyman with tentacles big enough to squeeze the life out of entire fleets and the attitude of Poseidon on a bad day. But as always, there's more to this monster than just calamari and chaos. So hoist the anchor, take one last breath, and prepare to dive. This one goes deep, darker than any trench and slipperier than a squid in an oil slick. Let's begin in the storm-tossed waters of Scandinavia, where the Kraken myth first burst from the briny deep. In Norse and Icelandic lore, the Kraken wasn't just some oversized sea creature. It was a living maritime apocalypse. A creature so vast it was often mistaken for an island. Fishermen might drop anchor on what looked like a safe resting spot, only to discover too late that their island had tentacles and a temper. The earliest accounts are laced with genuine fear. This wasn't a fun bedtime story. It was a living threat that lurked beneath the cold northern waves. And the best part, no one could agree on what the Kraken actually looked like. Some said it had many arms, long and thrashing like a squid's. Others described it with fins, fangs, glowing eyes, a more big enough to swallow a long ship whole, and skin like a bloated nightmare. You know, a real charmer. The term Kraken comes from the Old Norse word kraki, meaning twisted or crooked. It evolved into Craig in later Scandinavian languages, often used to describe malformed or monstrous creatures. Essentially, the name itself says, "Don't trust this thing. It's not right." The 13th century Norwegian text Kon Skugja or King's Mirror, one of the earliest known references to the Kraken, describes a creature of enormous size and strength, said to be so large it could swallow entire ships and leave no trace. It wasn't just a monster, it was the ocean personified. Chaotic, deadly, inevitable. By the time the 18th century rolled around, Kraken fever had officially infected Europe. Naturalists, theologians, and terrified mariners all weighed in. And then came the main event, Erik Pontoppidan, a Danish bishop with a flair for the dramatic. In his Natural History of Norway 1752, he described the Kraken as a real animal, not a myth, a legitimate deep-sea creature that lived off the coast of Norway. According to Pontoppidan, the Kraken was the size of a floating island, had dozens of enormous arms, and stirred up the sea when it surfaced, causing whirlpools so massive they could suck ships to the bottom like a cosmic sinkhole. He also claimed the Kraken expelled a mysterious black ink cloud, making the water dark and oily, a detail that would later align disturbingly well with actual squid biology. To make things even weirder, he insisted that despite the Kraken's destructive tendencies, fishermen loved it. Why? Because wherever it rose, there were fish, an oceanic buffet. Just, try not to get eaten while you're hauling in cod. The Kraken wasn't just terrifying. It was uncanny. It didn't act like other animals. It didn't live on the same scale. It seemed to break the rules of nature, which made it all the more believable in a world that didn't yet have sonar satellite imaging or trauma-informed therapy. Around the same time, European illustrators began drawing the Kraken. Early etchings show tentacled beasts crushing ships, their limbs wrapped around wooden masts like spaghetti around a fork. These images spread fast, appearing in besties maps and scientific journals. Suddenly, the Kraken wasn't just Scandinavian anymore. It was everyone's problem. Other cultures, too, had their versions of deep-sea terrors. The Leviathan, a monstrous sea serpent mentioned in the Hebrew Bible, was chaos incarnate, God's personal sea monster. Medieval bestiaries spoke of the Asphodel Colonna, a sea creature so huge it fooled sailors into thinking it was an island until it dove and drowned them all. And Polynesian cultures told stories of the Tanawa, spiritual sea beings that could be either protective or deadly depending on their mood and the people involved. The Kraken may have been born in Nordic waters, but it was part of a global pattern. Humanity's deep ancient fear of the sea and what hides in it. Enter the giant squid. For centuries, no one believed such creatures could exist. Then slowly, evidence began washing up on shorelines. Literal evidence. Beached carcasses. Tentacles the size of church bells. Sucker marks found on whales. Pieces of beasts too large, too alien to ignore. The line between myth and biology blurred. Today we know the giant squid is real. So is its even more elusive cousin, the colossal squid, which has longer tentacles, rotating hooks, and a disturbingly calm demeanor. These animals can grow over 40 feet long, have eyes the size of dinner plates, and live in the crushing black depths of the ocean where no light and very few cameras reach. And just when you think you can breathe easy, remember their main predator is the sperm whale. If the Kraken exists, it's hiding in plain sight and it's probably getting eaten by something worse. The Kraken slithered from maritime myth into literature and pop culture with ease. Alfred Lord Tennyson's 1830 poem, The Kraken, cast it as a sleeping god of the deep waiting for the end of days to rise and wreak havoc. In Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, the squid attack scene gave readers a taste of true underwater horror. one that felt suspiciously believable. By the time Hollywood got involved, the Kraken had evolved again. In Clash of the Titans, the line, "Release the Kraken," became a cultural moment, yelled at parties, memes, and passive-aggressive staff meetings. In Pirates of the Caribbean: Dead Man's Chest, the Kraken is a full CGI nightmare, yanking entire ships into the abyss like it's taking out the trash. In video games, the Kraken is a boss fight, a stormy obstacle, a tentacled metaphor for anything unmanageable. It even made it to branding. There's Kraken rum, Kraken energy drinks, Kraken sports teams, Kraken cryptocurrency. Apparently, nothing says reliable brand like an unstoppable force of maritime doom. And in the great modern tradition of turning terror into lifestyle, we now wear the Kraken on t-shirts, get it tattooed on biceps, and name our Wi-Fi networks after it. But despite the jokes, the Kraken remains terrifying for one reason. We still don't know what's really down there. The deep sea is largely unmapped, unexplored, and wildly underfed. We've explored more of the moon than we have of our own oceans. For all we know, something bigger, stranger, and quieter than the Kraken is drifting just below the reach of our lights. The Kraken is fear with suckers. It's the dread of the unknown. It's that moment when your ship cacks and the water goes still and you remember humans were never meant to be out here. So tonight, as you drift off to sleep, imagine the deep ocean not as empty but full-breathing ancient waiting. Somewhere far below, something stirs, something with a dozen arms, something that dreams in ink and storms. Sleep well and maybe don't take up sailing ferries. Now we're fluttering out of the shadows and into the twinkling, suspiciously well-decorated underbrush because we're talking about the trickiest little legends in the book. Fairies. Yes. Fairies or fae or the good folk or the fair folk or the kindly ones, because apparently even naming them wrong is a great way to get your house cursed and your livestock turned inside out. You know them now as pastel-winged pixies on greeting cards and glittery CGI besties in children's movies. But the original fairies. Not so friendly, not so sparkly, and definitely not babysitter material. If anything, they were the supernatural equivalent of do not disturb signs that walk around with sharp teeth and magical vendettas. So, light a candle, leave a saucer of milk by the door, and whatever you do, don't say thank you. Let's step carefully into the woods. Let's rewind to Celtic mythology, particularly in the mist-drenched landscapes of Ireland and Scotland, where fairy lore ran deep and terrifying. The Irish believed in the Ali or Iseed, a race of powerful beings who lived in the otherworld. They weren't little fluttery forest bugs. They were tall, noble, radiant, and deeply dangerous. Sometimes they helped. Sometimes they cursed entire bloodlines. Depends on their mood or the weather or whether you stepped on a mushroom. The Owlsea were often associated with ancient burial mounds called seed, which were believed to be portals to their world. These weren't graves. They were doorways. Cross the threshold uninvited. Don't expect to come back. Or if you do, congratulations. 100 years have passed and everyone you loved is dead. Whoops. These beings were not ghosts. They were not demons. They were something in between. Something elemental, ancient, tied to the land and its rhythms. Their moods swung with the wind, and their alliances shifted like shadows. One minute they might bless your harvest. The next they might curse your cows with 3 udders and 0 milk. The fairies were said to be remnants of the Tuatha De Danann, a divine race who once ruled Ireland before being defeated by the human legions. Rather than die out, they simply stepped aside and slipped beneath the earth. They became the unseen rulers of the land's hidden places. They didn't like to be noticed, but they definitely noticed you. The Scottish had their own fairy structures with the dual courts of Seelie and Unseelie. The Seelie were the good ones, If you define good as probably won't murder you unless provoked. They enjoyed mischief, flirtation, riddles, and dancing. They might help you if you were respectful. The unseelie court, on the other hand, was straight up malicious. No deals, no pleasantries, just curses, disease, and the occasional death spiral if you dared cross their path. They were creatures of night, winter, and ruin. If you saw her unseelie, probably meant you'd already screwed up. Over in Wales, the Tylw with Teg, literally the fair family, lived in hollow hills and beneath lakes. They were known for their beauty and elegance, their haunting music, and their absolute refusal to play by human rules. They danced in rings, they abducted lovers, and they sometimes took babies. In fact, one of the most enduring and disturbing fairy traditions is the changeling. A sickly, fussy, or eerie child left behind in place of a stolen human baby. Entire rituals were developed to prevent this kind of swap. Iron tools in the cradle, protective herbs, prayers, and in some darker cases, violence intended to drive the changing out and bring the real child back. The changeling belief wasn't confined to Celtic lands. Germany, Scandinavia, and Slavic countries all had their own versions. In Scandinavia, fairies were blamed for strange births or unexplained deformities. In Eastern Europe, spirits like the domovoi or vodnik occupied similar social niches. Protective temperamental household or water spirits who demanded respect and offerings. You see the pattern. If something went wrong in your house, barn or body, and you couldn't explain it, fairies. These weren't the sanitized Victorian fairies in flower hats. These were morally ambiguous, hyper-powerful, and frequently invisible agents of balance, chaos, and consequence, and they followed rules. Ancient, ironclad, arbitrary rules. Never thank a fairy. It implies closure. Never accept food in the fairy realm because you'll be trapped there forever. Never break a promise, even unintentionally. Never step inside a fairy ring. Those strange circles of mushrooms or grass in the forest. To us, it's just suspicious landscaping. To them, it's a sacred space. Violate it and you're likely to wake up bald, cursed, or with one foot in another century. Time worked differently in fairyland. Spend a night dancing with the fae. And when you return, 100 years might have passed. People who went missing in the woods sometimes reappeared decades later. Confused, uniged, and extremely traumatized. Others never came back or came back. Changed. Fairy courts had kings and queens. The most famous were Queen M and Titania, though they're best known today from Shakespeare, who took inspiration from older myths and turned the terrifying queens of the fae into sassy, enchanting monarchs of love and mischief. Titania, Oberon, and their ilk gave the fairies a makeover from menacing forest gods to romantic, ethereal dream weavers. In the medieval period, belief in fairies was complex and often contradictory. The church labeled them as demons or fallen angels, cast out from heaven, but not evil enough for hell. Yet, the common folk didn't stop believing or fearing. They left offerings. They respected the old places. They told stories, lots of stories. There were trooping fairies who traveled in large, elegant groups, holding processions through the night sky. There were solitary fairies like brownies who helped with household chores in exchange for bread and honey, but would turn destructive if insulted. And then there were creatures like redcaps, murderous goblin-like fae who soaked their hats in the blood of their victims. Not exactly Tinkerbell. Over time, fairy law spread and morphed. In France, you had the fays, elegant ladies of the forest who could enchant princes or curse them into frogs. In Italy, you found the Ben and Dante, a class of fairy seers who claimed to fight witches in their dreams to protect crops and livestock. In Russia, the forest spirit lay sometimes blurred with fairy folklore, leading wanderers astray and kidnapping unlucky travelers. And then the Victorians came along and said, "What if fairies were adorable?" Cue the explosion of delicate-winged, child-sized fairies in art, literature, and holiday decorations. Authors like J.M. Barrie gave us Tinkerbell, an emotionally volatile, pocket-sized diva. Artists like Cicely Mary Barker illustrated flower fairies so charming you'd forget they could still probably curse your crops. Fairy tales became safe for children, cleaned up, declawed, defanged. But in the cracks of the polished stories, the old fairies remained. You can still find them in the darker corners of modern fantasy, in the works of Holly Black, Terry Pratchett, Susanna Clarke, in video games where the FA realm is full of strange laws and sharp teeth, in urban legends about roadside disappearances, sleep paralysis, lost time, because fairies aren't gone. They've just gone quiet. They're watching, waiting, listening for the sound of a bell or a broken rule or a careless thank you. So tonight, as you drift towards sleep, picture the hedgerow outside your window, the glint of dew in the moonlight, the circle of mushrooms that wasn't there yesterday. And remember, the fair folk don't need you to believe in them. They just need you to behave. Sleep tight. Don't follow the music. Don't pick the flowers. And whatever you do, don't say thank you. Basilisk. Now, we're tiptoeing into a tale that's full of venom, stares, and ancient reptilian spite. But that's right. We're talking about the king of serpents, the slayer with a single glance, the literal death noodle, the basilisk, the creature so toxic, so terrifying that just looking at it was enough to snuff you out. One glare, one hiss, game over. It's the reptile that every other mythical monster crossed the street to avoid. And it's been scaring the sandals off humanity for well over 2,000 years. So, put down your mirrors, cancel your eye contact, and let's slither into the story. Let's rewind to ancient Greece where the word basiliskos first pops up. It means little king, not because it was charming or noble, but because people genuinely believed this reptilian horror ruled over all other snakes. According to the early naturalist Ply the Elder, the basilisk was only 12 fingers long, small, compact, but deadly, like a pocket-sized apocalypse with scales. Pliny claimed the snake didn't just kill with venom. Nope, its breath scorched plants. Its very scent cracked stones. Its gaze instant death. And if that wasn't enough, it left a trail of devastation wherever it slithered because clearly the ancient world believed in overachieving reptiles. The basilisk was supposedly born in a very specific and deeply weird way. If you wanted one, you had to find a snake, convince it to lay an egg, good luck, and then get a rooster to incubate it. That's right. A rooster egg hatched by a toad or serpent birthed the basilisk. Mythology. Ladies and gentlemen, it never fails to confuse. This strange birth legend is part of what makes the basilisk unique. It ties it to other weird hybrids in folklore. Creatures born under unnatural, cursed, or upside-down circumstances. Things that shouldn't exist but do anyway. Things that nature didn't authorize. And like most unholy hybrids, the basilisk was a walking contradiction. Tiny but deadly. Immobile, but unstoppable. Rare but terrifyingly influential. Fast forward to the Middle Ages and the basilisk gets a bit of a makeover. It's no longer just a snake. It's a lizard or a serpent with a crown or a snake with rooster legs or a chicken-snake lizard hybrid that walks upright like it pays rent. Basically, medieval people had no idea what this thing looked like. But they all agreed on one point. You did not want to meet it in a dark alley or anywhere else. Basilisks appeared in bestiaries. illuminated manuscripts, and moral fables as symbols of sin, pride, and the dangers of unchecked hubris. And if the illustrations are anything to go by, the artists were very much winging it. Some looked like lizards with lion faces. Others were snakes with mohawks. And one memorable version looks like a particularly angry chicken that just learned necromancy. The creature's power remained consistent, though. Death by glance. No sword. No claw. No roar. Just eye contact. And that meant the only reliable way to defeat a basilisk was to trick it into seeing its own reflection. Cue the mirror strategy. In legend, many a brave or rather desperate knight faced the basilisk armed with polished shields. The logic was simple. If you can't kill it, let it kill itself. Of course, getting close enough for the reflection to work usually meant you died anyway. So this wasn't exactly a solid survival plan. Enter the true basilisk slayer. The weasel. Yes. According to centuries of folklore, the humble weasel was immune to the basilisk's powers. People believed that if you let a weasel into a basilisk's lair, the two would battle to the death. And somehow, against all odds and evolutionary logic, the weasel usually won. The message here: never underestimate a furry rage bean with nothing to lose. Weasels were even used symbolically by farmers and villagers who couldn't afford knights or saints. In some German towns, they were believed to naturally hunt and destroy basilisks hiding in deep wells or cellars. The legend got so detailed that 16th-century plague doctors sometimes wore amulets made of weasel parts. Gross. Yes. Effective. Debatable. But the superstition ran deep. Speaking of deep, let's talk about underground basilisks, particularly those in Central and Eastern Europe. In cities like Warsaw, there were tales of basilisks lurking in abandoned basement. These weren't countryside horrors. These were urban monsters. Legends said you could identify a building with a basilisk in the cellar because all the plants nearby would wither and animals would refuse to go near it. As for people, one glance down the stairs and that was it. The townspeople would brick up the basement and pretend it never existed. The Middle Ages were nothing if not pragmatic. In some versions of the legend, basilisks could be killed by the sound of a rooster crowing, a poetic callback to their own twisted origins. The morning light, the sound of life banishing the creature of death. It's almost symbolic enough to be comforting. Almost. The basilisk's influence even seeped into alchemical and religious symbolism. In early Christian texts, it was used as a metaphor for Satan or mortal sin. The idea was that even the most subtle, smallest evil could bring spiritual ruin. One glance, one mistake, one slip. The basilisk was fear incarnate, condensed into a snake with a crown and a bad attitude. In alchemy, the basilisk symbolized ultimate destructive power, but also transformation. Alchemists used it as a metaphor for volatile substances or spiritual trials. It wasn't just about death. It was about change. Facing the basilisk could mean death of the ego, of ignorance, of the old self. Again, very dramatic, very on brand. Eventually, as Enlightenment thinkers came along and ruined everyone's fun with microscopes and logic, belief in the literal basilisk faded. But the idea stuck. The basilisk was too good a symbol to waste. Its story mutated, reappeared in art and metaphor, and was revived by every fantasy writer who ever thought, you know what? This dungeon needs a snake that can murder you with a glance. In modern media, the basilisk has worn many forms. In Harry Potter, it was reimagined as a vast serpent bred to obey dark magic and kill with direct eye contact. The mirror strategy still applied. And yes, it lived in a bathroom because why not? In Dungeons and Dragons, the basilisk can turn people to stone because medieval monster logic now comes with game mechanics. In the Witcher series, is portrayed more like a giant draconic bird-lizard hybrid. In Dark Souls, it's a goggle-eyed gas-spewing abomination that spreads death through clouds of despair. Still more likable than most co-workers. And then there's Roko's Basilisk, a modern thought experiment so mind-bending and disturbing that it became internet legend. The idea if a future AI becomes powerful enough, it might punish anyone who didn't help create it. Even just knowing about the possibility and doing nothing could be grounds for retroactive punishment. It's a 21st century mime basilisk. Seeing it is enough to hurt you. So, congrats. You now know about it. Sweet dreams. At the heart of the basilisk myth is a simple, terrifying idea. That some dangers cannot be fought, only avoided. That some forces are so destructive, so absolute that looking them in the eye is fatal. It's the monster that doesn't need to chase you. You'll destroy yourself just by noticing it. And that's what made it so powerful. So tonight, as you close your eyes, remember the shadow that doesn't move, the silence that waits, the gaze you must never return. Sleep well. Avoid the cellar. Don't talk to snakes. And whatever you do, don't look back. Banshee. Now, we're trading swords and serpents for something more spectral. We're not talking about a creature that slays with claws or venom. No, this one doesn't need to touch you at all. All she has to do is scream. Yes, the Banshee, the wailing woman of death, the high-pitched herald of doom, and arguably the most iconic Irish paranormal entity to ever ruin a perfectly good evening. So, grab a blanket, turn down the lights, and let's lean into the wail. Let's begin where she began. Ireland, land of mists, myths, and at least 6 different types of ghost. The Banshee, originally bean sea or bean cedar in Irish Gaelic, literally means woman of the fairy mound or fairy woman. So, right off the bat, we know we're dealing with something connected to the Ouse Sea, the supernatural race of beings tied to the other world. And while many fairy creatures could be mischievous, tricksy, or outright malevolent, the Banshee is something else. She doesn't chase. She doesn't curse. She doesn't kill. What she does is scream. And not just any scream. Keening. Bone-chilling wail that echoes through the night and makes every hair on your body stand up and salute. Why? Because when you hear the Banshee, it means someone is about to die. Traditionally, the Banshee isn't a villain. She's not malicious. She's a mourner, an omen, a supernatural family member in a way. In fact, some legends say she's specifically tied to certain ancient Irish families, usually those with names beginning with O. If your family name starts with one of those and you hear unexplained weeping in the night, well, maybe check on grandma. This wasn't superstition for fun. The connection between family and fate was deeply embedded in Irish culture. A death wasn't just a personal event. It was a communal rupture. The Banshee's cry was a kind of psychic announcement. It meant the other world was paying attention. It meant the boundary between life and death was already shifting. The act of keening, a loud, mournful wail sung at funerals, is a real ancient Irish tradition. Professional keeners, often women, were hired to express grief publicly and theatrically. The Banshee is thought to have evolved from this custom. A spirit who keys not after death, but before. She's the cosmic early warning system you never asked for. Descriptions of her vary wildly because of course they do. In some stories, she appears as a young woman with long flowing hair dressed in white or gray combing her hair by moonlight. In others, she's an old crone in rags with blood-red eyes from centuries of weeping. Sometimes she's seen washing bloody clothes at a stream, another omen of coming death. Occasionally she's just a disembodied voice, heard, but never seen. In that combing hair image, there's another layer of folklore. Her hair isn't just for drama. It's symbolic. Hair was believed to be a source of power and grief. In some tales, if you stole a banshee's silver comb, you could control her, or at least deeply offend her. Many old Irish households had taboos against picking up combs found outside, especially on roads or near rivers, because if you picked up the wrong comb, you might find yourself face to face with the woman who dropped it. Regardless of her form, the message is always the same. Someone's time is up. In older folklore, multiple banshees might wail together if someone of great importance was dying. Say a king, a clan leader, or that one aunt who never missed a wake. Their combined cries would shake the earth. It wasn't just mourning. It was cosmic confirmation. This death matters. In some tales, banshees didn't just appear before death. They lingered after. Some spirits known as bin coanti were thought to attach themselves to particular households passing through generations. These weren't malicious ghosts. They were legacy spirits, ancestral echoes, echoes that cried. The banshee's ties to the other world also hint at her origin. Some legends claim she was once a mortal woman, a grieving mother, a widow, a wronged soul who couldn't let go. Others say she's always been a part of the Sita sent to guide souls between worlds. In some tales, she's one of the bean na Scottish equivalents who appear at riverbanks washing the clothes of those about to die. The Scottish bean I was often described as more grotesque. A hag with webbed feet, greenish skin, and one massive nostril. Still she shared the same purpose. Mourning before the moment. And sometimes, if caught and questioned, she could even tell you whose death she was mourning. The Irish banshee, however, usually didn't speak. Her scream was enough. And what a scream it was. The scream itself is infamous. Sometimes it's described as a cry so high-pitched it shatters glass. Sometimes as a low, keening moan that seeps into your bones. Sometimes it's just a whisper in the wind that makes your stomach drop. But the effect is always the same. Dread. You don't hear the banshee as much as you feel her. The sound was said to travel. Heard across fields. Through locked windows. Between dreams. People didn't always know what direction it came from. Just that it was coming and that it meant something was about to leave. Over time, her legend evolved. In pop culture, she's taken on more gothic forms. Ghostly women in castles. Shrieking phantoms in horror films. Villains in paranormal fiction. Sometimes she's a misunderstood specter. Sometimes she's a literal banshee screaming boss monster. In Dungeons and Dragons, for example, she's an undead fae with a shriek attack that can knock adventurers out cold. In comics and video games, she's been turned into a siren, a villainess, even a rock star. Everyone loves a girl with pipes. There's also the psychological element. The banshee became a symbol of internal fear. The anticipatory grief we carry. The fear of receiving bad news. Of hearing the phone ring at midnight. Her scream represents that gut-drop moment when your world shifts. In literature, she's shown up everywhere from Irish poetry to Gothic novels to modern fantasy. Her scream has become a metaphor for grief, for fear, for the sudden knowledge that something terrible is coming and there's nothing you can do about it. Some scholars believe the banshee represents the cultural tension between life and death, between the mortal world and the other world. She is grief personified, a voice for the dying before the dying happens. And in that sense, she's not just a myth, she's a reminder that all things end, that someone somewhere will mourn us, that even death deserves a soundtrack. So tonight, as you settle into your blanket and listen to the wind outside, remember, if you hear something weeping beyond the trees, it might not be the wind, it might be her. Sleep softly, and if you hear the wail, listen, but don't answer. Minotaur. Now we're plunging into one of the most infamous myths of the ancient world. Half man, half bull. fully trapped in a maze built by an architectural madman. That's right, we're talking about the Minotaur, the horned horror of Crete, the snorting nightmare at the heart of a labyrinth, and ancient Greece's tragic beefcake of doom. So, lace up your sandals. Don't forget the thread. And let's wander straight into the myth. Our story begins on the island of Crete, ruled by King Minos, who was basically the poster boy for divine entitlement. Minos prayed to Poseidon, god of the sea, asking for a sign of his divine right to rule. Poseidon, ever the showman, sent him a dazzling white bull from the waves. The instructions were simple. Admire the bull, then sacrifice it in Poseidon's honor. But Minos, having the moral discipline of a soggy breadstick, decided to keep the bull instead. He figured Poseidon wouldn't notice. Spoiler, Poseidon noticed. And like all good mythological grudges, this one got weird. Poseidon cursed Minos by making his wife Pasiphae fall madly biblically in love with the bull. Yes, that kind of love. She was obsessed. This isn't even subtext. It's just text. To consummate this cursed affair, Pasiphae enlisted the help of Daedalus, the greatest inventor in myth, and apparently also a guy who didn't ask a lot of follow-up questions. He built her a hollow cow costume. Yes, really, so she could sneak off and bond with the bull. From this deeply cursed union came the Minotaur, a creature with the body of a man and the head of a bull, a hybrid of divine punishment, royal betrayal, and Greek myth at its most unhinged. Naturally, he didn't get a great start in life. The baby miner named Asterion, which means starry one, or didn't stay cute for long. He grew quickly, aggressively, violently, human enough to have awareness, animal enough to have no control, and definitely too dangerous to keep around the palace. He couldn't be reasoned with, couldn't be taught, couldn't be ignored. Yet, he wasn't purely a beast. He had intelligence, emotion, rage, loneliness, and nowhere to put any of it. Every year he grew, so did the fear around him. Eventually he had to be locked away, entered Daedalus again, still somehow employed, and now asked to build a prison. Not just any prison, a labyrinth, a sprawling, twisting maze so complex no one could escape it. The ultimate timeout for the world's angriest hybrid child. But the labyrinth wasn't just a prison. It was a monument to concealment, to shame, to the monstrous things people want to bury and forget. The Minotaur was locked inside alone, fed on a diet of despair and eventually people. Because that's the next part of this cheerful tale. Sacrifice. Athens, under Minos's thumb after losing a war, was forced to send 7 young men and 7 maidens every 9 years or every year depending on the version to be thrown into the labyrinth and devoured by the Minotaur. It was horror as politics. A ritual reminder of submission and not a great recruiting tool for Greek tourism. These were not volunteers. They were victims. Children of noble houses. Tokens of guilt and power. Their families wept and Minos watched. The labyrinth became a living tomb, a secret fed in silence. Enter our hero, Theseus, Prince of Athens. Young, hot, bold, and extremely confident in his ability to slay bull-headed monstrosities. Theseus volunteers to be one of the tributes. But unlike the others, he has a secret weapon. Ariadne, daughter of Minos and Pasiphae, who falls head over heels for him and gives him a ball of thread. This is not metaphorical. It's literal. She tells him to tie the thread to the entrance and unwind it as he goes so he can find his way back out. Some say she gave him a sword. 2. Others say he used the horns. What matters is he found the Minotaur. They fought and Ion died. Theseus escaped. Ariadne got ditched on an island because Greek heroes were all trash at relationships. And the labyrinth became a ruin of memory and myth. But the story doesn't end there. Let's step back and look at what the Minotaur represents. On the surface, a monster, a punishment, a beast to be slain. But dig a little deeper, past the horns and blood, and you find tragedy. The miner didn't choose to exist. He was born of a curse, a symbol of divine wrath against human arrogance. His whole life was imprisonment, isolation, fear. He wasn't evil by choice. He was an abomination by design, a victim of mythological politics and celestial spite. He represents the shadow self, the animal within us, the rage we bury, the part we trap in the maze of our own minds. Carl Jung would have had a field day. The labyrinth itself, more than a prison, is a symbol of complexity, of confusion, of the long winding journey to face one's inner beast. To navigate the labyrinth is to undergo transformation. To find your way out is to become someone else. Ion is often left out of the heroic narrative. He's reduced to a boss monster. But in versions like Jorge Luis Borges' short story, The House of Ion, the Minotaur gets a voice. He describes his endless loneliness, his hope, his belief that the stranger who comes, Theseus, is not his killer, but his liberator. He waits in the dark in silence. And when death comes, he welcomes it, not as a defeat, but as release. In modern culture, the Minotaur charges on. He appears in everything from Percy Jackson and the Chronicles of Narnia to Dungeons and Dragons, where he's usually a hulking, axe-wielding brute who guards dungeons like he's on payroll. In some mythologies, he's been turned into an entire race, Minotaurs plural, each one doomed to violence. In The Witcher, World of Warcraft, Magic, The Gathering, the Minotaur is a fantasy staple. Big, brutal, always bellowing, rarely speaking. But in indie fiction and revisionist myth, the miner has started to reclaim his story as a creature with thoughts, feelings, maybe even a soul. There are Minotaur statues, Minotaur beers, miner wrestling personas. He's a symbol now of wildness, strength, of tragic isolation. And he still echoes in every story that places a monster at the center of a maze. So tonight, as you drift off, imagine not the labyrinth, but the creature within. Not the monster you must defeat, but the one you must understand. The part of you that growls in the dark, that wants to be seen, that did not ask to be born. Sleep well. Don't lose the thread. And if you hear something snorting in the dark, maybe don't go charging in without a map. Werewolf. Now we're howling at the moon because we're talking about the original hairy problem child of mythology. The werewolf. That's right. The man-beast. The full moon freakout. The horror movie hunk with anger issues and a grooming problem. Half man. Half wolf. All kinds of messy. So grab a blanket. Maybe chain yourself to the radiator just in case. And let's prowl into the tale. The concept of humans transforming into animals is ancient. Older than your grandma's grandma's grandma. Shape-shifting is found in stories from every continent. But when it comes to wolves specifically, Europe gets the gold medal because nothing says medial panic like accusing your neighbor of being a werewolf because he's a bit too into night walks. Let's start with the roots. The earliest mention of werewolfish lore comes from Greek mythology because of course it does. Enter Lion, king of Arcadia, who thought it would be fun to trick Zeus by feeding him human flesh. Zeus, famously not great with practical jokes, punished him by turning him into a wolf. You displease a god. You get fur and fangs. That's the rule. This myth gave us the word lyanthropy from Laios, wolf, and anthropos, man. And that word stuck. It wasn't just a fun term for a moonlit makeover. It was also used in medical texts to describe people who believed they were wolves. Yep, Werewolves had an actual diagnostic file in medieval medicine. Psychiatry. But make it spooky. Now, let's talk Middle Ages, aka the Golden Age of Paranoia. This is when werewolf legends really exploded. Dwarves were already feared as real predators. Add in famine, disease, superstition, and boom. Now every loner with a beard and an appetite is suspect. In France, the werewolf was known as the Loup Guru. Stories spread like wildfire. A cursed man roamed the forests at night, hunting livestock, attacking travelers, and sometimes devouring children. Charming. Sometimes the curse was punishment. Steal, cheat, break a vow and boom. Wolf time. Other times it was a choice. In some legends, people became werewolves using magical salves, belts, or potions. Etsy witchcraft DIY transformation kits. In Germany, they had the werewolf. Not just a myth, but a full-blown social fear. People believed witches could transform others into wolves as punishment or curses. Others thought the devil granted lycanthropic powers to his faithful. Entire villages held trials. People were burned, executed, and publicly flayed for alleged wolfy crimes. The werewolf became Europe's favorite scapegoat when crops failed or bodies turned up missing. But not all stories were monstrous. In Scandinavian and Slavic folklore, some werewolves were protectors, guardians, cursed heroes who turned to beasts to defend villages or battle evil. In Russia, legends tell of Volkak, wolf warriors who could be dangerous or noble, depending on the tale. In Estonia, werewolves were said to roam not to kill, but to fight off witches and demons. In parts of Wales and Ireland, there were tales of wolf shapeshifters who weren't cursed at all, just different, able to move between human and wolf form with purpose. Not rage. Some could even retain their speech while transformed, offering warnings or wisdom before vanishing into the trees. The line between cursed monster and tragic hero was always thin. One tale's villain was another's protector. Now, about that whole full moon thing, that's a more recent invention. Ancient and medieval sources didn't always link werewolves to lunar cycles. That connection solidified in the 19th and 20th centuries thanks to literature, folklore blending, and of course, Hollywood. The 1941 film The Wolfman turned the full moon into a plot device. And suddenly lycanthropy had a curfew. The full moon as a transformation trigger might feel natural now. After all, the moon has always been tied to madness. Hello, lunacy, and wild instincts. But for most of history, werewolves could transform whenever their story needed them to. No moon required. Anger, grief, hunger, or revenge were just as potent. Silver bullets also modern. Earlier stories had all kinds of anti-werewolf tools. Iron, fire, exorcism, holy water, and in some really fun versions, saying the werewolf's Christian name 3 times. Good luck with that while it's tearing out your throat. Some believed you could be cured of lycanthropy by hitting the person over the head with a stick. Others swore by conversion therapy through piety. Still others recommended surgery. Which just no. As the legend evolved, so did the werewolf's image. In Gothic fiction, werewolves were symbols of untamed desire, animal instincts, forbidden urges, repressed rage. They weren't just scary. They were sexy, dangerous, and tragic and hot under all that fur. In modern pop culture, werewolves range from terrifying to heartthrob material. In Harry Potter, Remus Lupin made lycanthropy a metaphor for chronic illness and social stigma. In Twilight, Jacob Black made it a shirtless teenage drama. In Teen Wolf, it's acne, hormones, and superpowers. In The Witcher, they're fearsome side quests. In D&D, they're stat blocks with attitude. They've even crossed genres. Werewolf detectives, werewolf lovers, werewolf soldiers, werewolf boy bands. Yes, really, they're heroes, they're villains, they're complicated and they're always hungry. Werewolves have clawed their way into novels, anime, rom-coms, horror films, paranormal romance, and metaphor-laced psychological thrillers. They've become symbols for puberty, mental illness, identity struggles, grief, addiction, and rage. The beast within isn't always evil. It's what you do with it. Psychologists have had a field day with this one. The werewolf is the shadow self, the Jungian Aid Unchained, the embodiment of rage, sexual tension, and the fear of losing control. Lyanthropy in many ways is a symbolic condition, a metaphor for all the parts of ourselves we suppress to function in polite society. And that's the core of it really. The werewolf myth survives because it taps into something raw, that split inside us. The fear of losing control, of hurting others, of not recognizing the thing we become under pressure. The werewolf is about transformation. Yes, but not just body, mind, soul, morality. It's a question. And are we human all the way down, or are we just one bad night away from teeth and blood? So tonight, as you lie beneath the stars, listen for the wind, the howl, the part of yourself you don't show in daylight. Sleep well, lock the door, and if you wake up outside naked and surrounded by paw prints, maybe keep that to yourself. Vampires. Now we're uncaulking a vintage myth with just the right notes of blood, terror, and timeless glamour. Yes, the last creature of choice is none other than the vampire, the immortal icon of horror, seduction, and bad decisions with necks. So, dim the light, maybe hop into the kitchen to get some garlic, and let's invite the legend in. The vampire, pale, sharp-toothed, smooth-talking, impossible cheekbones, problematic. We all know the modern image. Thank you, Hollywood. But the vampire story is older, weirder, and a whole lot messier than your average black velvet Dracula cosplay. To trace the vampire's true origins, we need to leave behind castles and cloaks and head deep into the shadows of ancient fear. Because long before Edward Cullen sparkled and long before Dracula raised his goblet of doom, the idea of something undead that feeds off the living was already haunting humanity. Let's start in Mesopotamia because of course we do. Civilizations there had tales of creatures like the Akimu and Utaku, spirits of the unburied dead who returned to suck the life from the living. Not with fangs, with dread. These spirits didn't need to bite. They just drained joy, health, and peace. Sound familiar? Jump over to ancient Greece and you get stories of Empe and Lamia, demon women who seduced men before devouring them. Sometimes they drank blood. Sometimes they just ruined your life. Honestly, same thing. Lamia in particular was a child-devouring spirit cursed by her after Zeus again got handsy with a mortal. These legends bled into Roman tales of striges, which were basically owl women who drank the blood of infants. Ancient horror didn't mess around, and the idea that the dead could return with a hunger never really left the cultural bloodstream. But if we're talking about true vampires, reanimated corpses that crawl from graves and feast on human blood, we need to head into Eastern Europe, where the myth goes full nightmare. By the Middle Ages, Slavic folklore was bursting with tales of the Upia, a bloated, reddish, rank-smelling revenant who clawed out of the ground to drink the blood of livestock and neighbors. These weren't sexy night stalkers. These were swollen corpse monsters, and they were everywhere. Fear of vampires became a very real social issue. Villagers in Poland, Bulgaria, Romania, and Serbia would exhume bodies after a death if weird things happened in the community. Cows died. Children got sick. Someone had a bad dream. dig up the recently deceased. If they looked too fresh, if they had blood at the mouth, if their nails had grown, burn them, stake them, decapitate them, rear with a rock in their mouth. Yes, that was a real thing. In fact, archaeologists have uncovered graves with anti-vampire measures. Stones in mouths, iron rods through hearts, corpses buried face down, and even decapitated skeletons with their heads between their knees. Preventative corpse management, a thriving medieval industry. In many of these tales, becoming a vampire wasn't about being bitten. It was about dying badly. If you were excommunicated, buried without rites, a witch, a suicide, or just kind of suspicious, you might come back. And when you did, you wouldn't be hot. You'd be terrifying. And yet, despite all the terror, the vampire has always been a paradox. A creature of repulsion and attraction, death and desire. They come from filth and rot, but they move with elegance. They kill, but they seduce. They're everything we fear and everything we wish we could get away with. And then came Dracula. In 1897, Bram Stoker published his iconic novel Dracula, blending ancient Eastern European law with Victorian fears and Gothic moodiness. His vampire was intelligent, powerful, seductive, and profoundly dangerous. Count Dracula had a castle, passport, and a plan. Stoker borrowed heavily from real vampire panic, and loosely from Vlad the Impaler, the bloodthirsty prince of Wakia, known for, well, impaling people. Vlad wasn't a vampire. He was just a terrifying human. But his legend, plus some clever branding, cemented Dracula as the definitive vampire for centuries to come. Dracula did for vampires what Frankenstein did for mad science. Created the blueprint, the brooding ancient noble with hypnotic powers and a thirst for the living. It also locked in some law. No reflection, fear of sunlight, powers of transformation, and of course, the need for an invitation to enter your home. After Dracula, the vampire evolved stage plays, then silent films, then Nosferatu in 1922, the bald rat tooth-fed creeper who solidified the vampire as a cinematic horror staple. Then came Bela Lugosi's suave Dracula in 1931 who added the accent and the cape. By the 60s and 70s, Hammer horror gave us Technicolor blood, heaving bosoms, and vamps with flair. Then came Anne Rice. Interview with the Vampire 1976 redefined the myth. Her vampires were tragic, gorgeous, existentially tormented beings who talked about sin and beauty while sipping the blood of opera-goers. Suddenly being undead was fabulous. Dark but fabulous. And then, oh yes, Twilight. Vampires went to high school, became sparkly, bought Volvos. We don't talk about it, or we talk about it too much. Even now, vampires are everywhere. In True Blood, they're political. In the Vampire Diaries, they're hot messes. In What We Do in the Shadows, they're hilarious. In Blade, they're techno-goth club monsters with frosted tips. There's a vampire for every vibe. And across cultures, the vampire wears different faces. In China, there's the Jang Sh, a hopping corpse that drains life energy. In India, you get the Vitala, a spirit that possesses corpses. In the Philippines, the Manananggal is a vampire-like creature who detaches her upper body and flies through the night in trails dangling to feast on fetuses. Yes, you heard that right. Sleep tight. The Stragoi of Romania, the Nosferatu of Transylvania, the Abeo of West Africa. Nearly every culture has a version of the undead predator who comes at night to drink life. Even in Native American folklore, you find blood-sucking spirits and life-draining shadow beings. Some fly, some crawl, some look like people you once knew. But why? Why do we keep telling this story? Some say it's about disease. Before germ theory, people had to make sense of contagion somehow. One death followed by another. Clearly, the dead were feeding on the living. Some say it's about grief. The vampire is a metaphor for the unbearable truth that the dead do not always stay gone. A way to personify loss and make it something you can stab. Others say it's about repression. The vampire is about what we want but can't admit. Sex, power, immortality. We fear it. We crave it. We mythologize it. And then we put it in leather pants. In psychology, vampires represent addiction, obsession, narcissism, the toxic friend who drains you dry but always gets invited back. In pop culture, they're a gold mine. You can put a vampire in any genre. Romance, horror, fantasy, sci-fi, teen drama, sitcom. They're adaptable, immortal, after all. But beneath the glamour, the fangs, the swoony nonsense, the vampire endures because it speaks to a universal fear that what's dead isn't really gone. That desire once unleashed can destroy. That monsters wear beautiful faces. So tonight, as you close your eyes, remember vampires don't knock. They wait to be invited. Sleep well, and maybe skip the nightcap, especially if he's wearing a cape.